Hello and welcome to the November installment of the Great Lakes Reading Series. My name is Julianne Russo, and joining me today are two very special guests. These two talented authors are here to read from their latest works of poetry and chat a little bit about the creative process. I'd like to begin by introducing our guests. First, we have Evaculax. She is a poet and painter whose works are inspired by the multifaceted nature of both interior and the exterior world. She's a member of the League of Canadian Poets and the Ontario Poetry Society, and as a painter, is an elected member of the Ontario Society for Artists. Eva published her first book of poems called Whatever We Are with Hidden Brook Press in 2019, and in 2020 she co-authored Fire and Water, published by Black Moss Press, with her husband Lawrence Hutchman. Eva is joining us today to share her latest book called Solace, also published by Black Moss Press. Our second guest is Michael Marola. He is a Canadian novelist, short story writer, poet, and playwright who lives in Oakville, Ontario. Marola was awarded the Bressani Award for his novel Berlin in 2010, and he has won the Bressani Award a total of 3 times. Since 2009, he has served as Vice President of Guernica Editions, one of Canada's oldest and most successful independent presses, and he joins us today to share his book, At the End of the World, published by Black Moss Press.
I chosen as a first poem to read. It's about my sister dementia. Very energetic, beautiful woman, artist, and suddenly it happened. Sucking up the brain cells, dementia, out of the shape that can't be measured. Her mind slowly descends from moonlight over the cries of night birds to land of familiar surroundings that appears friendly but acts as a stranger. It flies and floats in the nest made of gray cells, grows as a void swaying beneath its load until the brain finds itself on the edge of sucking. The glimmer of sunlight has flown toward her like a dragonfly landing on her skirt. She tries to pick it up.
That's beautiful.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Michael, today I was going through your poetry and I found a beautiful poem titled To a Poet Struggling to Recover Her Words. And being, with Solace and with my sister, with her dementia, I was admiring so much this poem. I sit across her from her spoon-feeding alphabet strands in a hungry mouth, fearful that the words that kept her whole, that have defined her, that connect her to herself, that have built this gray room, will be unable to make the return journey. Please note, I love it. This is not being a metaphor.
Thanks, Eva. You just read the poem I was going to read.
No.
It's okay. I've got others.
Oh, that's too funny.
That was great. No, the thing
we have some favorite of yours.
Yeah, right. The thing
Poem.
about
We enjoy so much.
Yeah, the thing about dementia and that is the language is a very important part of it, and language is the most important part of poetry. So when the two of them, when they start to divert or come apart, as it were, then there's a double sadness, let's put it that way, that a person is losing memory, losing connection to other people, also, and losing language, losing that ability, because as human beings, I mean, that is, we can touch and all of that. It's there. That's another language, in fact, but our verbal language is extremely important. And so, yeah, I mean, that poem, to a poet, and in fact, that poem was written because of a person that I know, a poet, a fellow poet, who went through the process of, they had to take out a portion of her brain because it was developing some type of, I forget now what it was, cancer of some sort. And then, you know, because of that, she lost the ability to speak. And I've got another poem called "In the Cave of Lost Language," which is about, again, about, you know, this, each time, the thing now, when each time you put your hand in your pocket, in the pocket of knowledge, you come up with something different. You come up with something not like it was before. And then one day you start to notice that you can't figure things out anymore. You can't come up with the right word for something. And you know, and then you start to worry yourself. You start to say, well, you know, what's happening? Why I used to be able to do this, and now what's happening? Well, part of it is natural, you know, I think, as we get older. I like to say that the reason for it is because we have so much in our brains, we have to kick stuff out, right? So trying to remember who was the first actress in the first James Bond movie, you know, that kind of stuff is...
I can make you.
I mean, some people still do it. You know, they still remember that. And they tell you. But anyway.
I don't remember titles. I don't remember nothing. And Lawrence is asking me, "Do you know this movie?" I said, "I have to see."
Right.
I don't. I have no ability of remembering titles. Even it's shame. But Michael, I just like to add that my sister lost ability to speak 1 year ago.
Right.
She's not, she's silent.
Right.
So it is very difficult for us to communicate. She's still alive, she's still with us, but maybe 1 week more or 2 weeks right now. So thank you for sharing this beautiful, amazing poem with us.
Yes. Now, Michael, would you like to choose another poem and read one for us?
Sure, I've got other poems. Yeah. A little bit about. I just talk a little bit about how I write the poems, how I come about with ideas for poetry. It's fairly. So for me, it starts out mostly as a vague idea, vague feeling, some sort of image that you get in your head, and then as you start to write, things start to become more concrete. And when it comes down to it, my ideas about poetry are concise, precise, concrete imagery. I'm not fond of. I mean, poetry is a kind of a paradox when you think about it, because the idea that when you go into a poetic state, let's put it that way, it's emotional. You want the emotions out there. You want to, that's. But when you start to write the poem, you want to be controlled, and you want the language to be very, very tight, and because otherwise, the danger, of course, is that you start to write Hallmark Hall of Fame cards, right? Where there's emotion in them for sure, but it's so watered down and spread out.
Flat, so obvious.
Yeah.
Are you struggling when trying to find right words and repeating images, and again trying to find another words for them? It's for me, it's writing struggle. It's a repetition.
So concrete imagery is what you really want in poetry. I think, anyway. This is my opinion. It's
to be precise.
That's. But at the same time, as I said, you've got to get the emotional aspect, the emotional part out there, because that's the reason why you're writing the poetry in the first place. It's not an intellectual process, right? It's not. If you want to do that, you might as well write a philosophy paper, or but but the language and the music, as you said, you mentioned the music, the way the words roll along, the metaphors. Yeah, I mean, all of that is quite important. All right, so my latest collection, At the End of the World, it combined. It's the main images are, there are two, and it's bones and caves. Those are the two, and so bones and caves. So what does that mean? Well, in sort of the largest context, I think bones would refer to our mortality, our sort of body, what we're born with and what we carry with us until the end. And the caves represent what we learn along the way, the knowledge that we get, and the other things, the experiences, and which you need your bones for to fully comprehend.
Carry them.
Right.
Because otherwise, again, you'd be the brain, and there's a thought experiment about, are we actually brains in a vat somewhere, So, and that's, we're just dreaming the rest of this stuff, our bodies, and all of that. It's an interesting thing. But so the poem, the first poem I like to read is about a little bit about what it means, what it means what the idea of darkness and light mean when it comes to Plato's cave, for example. So another look inside Plato's cave. In the rush to escape talk of darkness and ghosts, we all too often flip on lights that blind rather than, well, I think you know what I'm getting at. What is the key thing about a line of poetry, darkness or light? We are taught that one reflects a crawling about in that unwanted state of unknowing, the other the brilliance of eureka and measured lines in bathtubs, light years apart, as the expression goes. So let us take a step back for a moment, back into the cave that started it all. Well, it didn't really. Remember, being without form and void, Cimmeria where the sun never shines, the divas and the asuras, scorpions guarding Kurnogi, dark and dreary Irkala, ah yes, the cave, and the assurance that what we, the shackled prisoners, see are shadows cast by a behind our back fire that both illuminates and deceives. Or to make things a little more 21st century, light from an iPhone's flashlight galaxy app with a selfie that refuses to be taken. The implication, of course, being that there is something beyond the cave, beyond the shadows, that one has a choice to head deeper into the cavern or to walk out through the mouth into the blaze of day. But Socrates, as always hedging his bets, did say he was being allegorical. And what does that imply? That the cave wasn't really a cave? That beyond the cave there exists what? Simply another cave? That shedding the shackles means choosing between a Pyrrhonian half-dark and the half-light of Diogenes? But there's no poetry in that, no magic use of words to burn through the smokescreen of the senses, no hope of ever ascending to Plato. So what's to be done? Well, how about this? Rather than futile attempts to loosen the chains, have you freed yourself or just think you have? Rather than busting a gut to escape the cave, have you stepped outside or just think you have? Why not find a position that doesn't stop the flow of blood? Make yourself comfortable, sprinkle some doubt over your popcorn, and add your own shadows to the wall. I know, most definitely plan B, but you must admit, at the very least, it keeps you safe from both darkness and light.
Very nice. Well, and Eva, I'm sure you can see the similarities in, especially the next poem you wanted to read, The Morning of Pale Sunlight. You also sort of have those contrasting lights. Would you like to read us that one next?
I think so. Yeah. So this poem is based on my walks along the lake shore of Lake Ontario.
But you won't be doing much longer, Eva. You're leaving us.
You will come and join us for the walks at the ocean. And the morning of pale sunlight, let freedom sing. E. Cummings. The morning of pale sunlight walked me to the bay. The waves were holding the rocks with affection. Then, by losing their grip moved backwards into the belly of the lake and reappeared. Embracing is an act of love, a consolation or passion, its strength depending, like everything else, on unpredictable changes of weather. Someone said that outstanding works of literature, art, and music closely match multi-faced patterns of nature. If the brain is the highest achievement of God's creation, why are we trembling as caught in the spider's web? Life forms dreams of bright future and nightmares. We sail between them to find the forgotten seas of liberty. So this was my reflection on, you know very well, the walks along the lake shore.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so I think we do have time. Well, let's move back to Michael here because we'll have you read your second poem and then maybe we'll discuss that for a few seconds and then we can close off the show with one more poem each.
Okay. All right. So my second poem is trying to update Greek mythology. Demeter makes plans to uproot herself. Already, umbilical cord intact, but with eyes downcast, the lamb she's fondling against her chest seems to understand what the rest of us keep at arm's length, often till our final breath. A mother's love, be it as genuine and sweet as myth, can only wrap itself around you for so long. The mossy paths through the wood leaves footprints that slowly fill with seepage and mirrors of a turbid sky, memories of Escher woodcuts, Celtic magic buried as traps for Roman centurions, the furious buzz of flies rising in some no-exit place. And then one god after the other tumbles out and prepares to take a stand, from minor to major, pissant to thunder, but always harping on the same note. Worship me, or else watch me turn into a serial killer. Watch me drag your children under. Satyrs and nymphs spring forth amid gnarled tree roots, spitting earth and earthworms. They clear the way for a troop of trick-playing sheep and goats. Lamb trailing a swollen-bellied mother, they waddle in elegant disarray, rushing towards the voice that they've come to trust, that calls to them now from a clearing in the trees, formed by a blast of well-placed lightning. One hand clutching grain, the other behind her back, where a glint of sunlight flicks off sharpened metal. Mare-headed Aganippe scatters her blessings, staccato style, as she stands on the steps of the self-consecrated temple she had her consort build in that clearing to separate herself from sacred law, eternal harvests, merciful destruction, and the endless hunger of needy partners. This is where, she tells you, lamb on her lap, she will spend a newborn winter, away from the rancid odor of spilled mead, palace intrigue, and thoughts of daughters dragged down to some twilight universe by horny demigods tired of gazing at their own reflections, and where, using her brother's always handy flamethrower to keep warm as snow erases all color and wolfish shadows gather, she will celebrate the joy of a newfound religion. glass of red wine on the table, and mutton stew gurgling on the pot-bellied stove.
Another very deep sort of look into the cave. But it is very interesting, like how the imagination really plays into everyday life, you know. And I think poetry, one of the questions I was thinking when I was, writing or looking into what we're going to talk about today was how imagination does play a role, and especially in this case, Michael, where you can't go visit, you can't spend a lot of times in a cage. I mean, here we are, it's COVID-19 and we're stuck here in Ontario. So you really do have to use your imagination just to get you to that place to start with. And when we were looking at, or when I was reading through Eva's poems, there's this, I guess, sense when you're looking at someone who's dealing with dementia, where they're sort of lost inside of themselves. So it's just very interesting how these two books play so well together, I think.
It's interesting, though, that being lost inside yourself doesn't necessarily mean that your imagination isn't working, right? Mm. I personally, here we're talking in a personal sense, I have a sister-in-law who actually lives with us, and she's pretty much she's spent 40 years or so in institutions, and she's paranoid schizophrenic, and everything, it's all what TV tells her or something, right? But her imagination is incredible. I mean, you
think about a lovely person.
Well, and it's the things we learn that put restraints on us, right? Yeah. So we learn to restrain things, where when you look at like an innocent child, and that just like an airplane flying by can really spark their imagination, where we sort of get used to these things. Right. So it is interesting, as adults, we stop using our imagination sometimes. So I think that's one of the reasons poetry is so important, because we do want things to be concise and precise, but we also need to sometimes let go and let your imagination sort of take you different places.
Yeah.
When I'm tired of words, I'm going to paint.
Yeah.
This is my painting.
Yeah. That's the artist inside. It's got to come out, right? When you're tired of words, you use, I guess, what you see.
And then hunger will come for words, and I start to again. So I will write. I have a problem with seeing. There is no light. That's why I'm making mistakes too.
Oh, no worries. But yeah, if you would like to read one final selection, that would be great. And then we can turn back to Michael to finish things off.
I will read this shorter poem, which is Antidote to Confusion. This afternoon rain comes unexpectedly and stops in the middle of the road. And bang, I'm locking the air with no ground beneath my feet, in the place where a human presence reveals vulnerability, but could be of use as the starting point. Happiness is not ideal for reason, but of imagination. The imagination, so curiously abstract, changes how the eyes work. All cravings released. They sing. I watch my body open like a flower. The rest could be invented. The skill comes with practice.
Lovely. It's so much better to hear you read it than just for myself to read it, where there's such a difference to hear a poet reading their poetry. It's just amazing. So Michael, we can turn to you to read one more, and that would be wonderful.
Okay. Well, I didn't, I only selected 3, and one of them was the one that Eva wrote, but she only gave the last few lines. So maybe I'll
just start with
why don't you read the whole thing for us?
I'll read the whole thing.
Sounds good. Yep.
Okay. To a poet struggling to recover her words, please note This is not a metaphor. In the spongy gray room, walls reticulated, bony chair bolted to upheaving floor, spotlight at 10 flickers per second, she sits. There's a hole in the side of her head. There's a hole where they extracted the overeager building blocks, the out-of-control tidbits of DNA. The incisions were precise, one must assume, but it didn't prevent the words, her words, from escaping into the sterile air. Now, a saintly smile framing her face, she sits in the bony chair inside the spongy gray room with reticulated walls and reaches out to recapture the stray letters that may or may not have survived without her tender care. I sit across from her, spoon-feeding alphabet strands into a hungry mouth, fearful that the words that have kept her whole, that have defined her, that connect her to herself, that have built this gray room, will be unable to make the return journey. Please note, this has not been a metaphor.
Thank you.
The words which are making us whole. This is amazing. This is what struck me, Michael.
Yep, very nice. Okay, well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have here today. And so I'm just going to finish things up here because that concludes this edition of the Great Lakes Reading Series. But before we go, I'd like to thank both of our authors for joining us. So thank you, Michael Marola and Evaculax.
Thank you, Julian.
Oh, you're welcome.
Bye, Michael.
Thank you very much, and thank the gang at Black Moss.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure, and it's always a more meaningful experience, I think, to hear poets reading their poetry. And I'd also like to thank our audience and everyone joining us for this conversation. Thank you. And for anyone interested in purchasing books, please visit our website. It's www.blackmosspress.com or visit your local bookseller.
And that concludes this installment of the Great Lakes Reading Series. Thanks to the Canadian Council of the Arts and the League of Canadian Poets for their continued support. I'm Julianne Russo.